Hello and welcome to this tutorial on the Photoshop Workspace. We're going to go through some of the basics of Photoshop, how the screen's laid out, where the tools are, what they do, where the palettes are, what they do. It should give you all the basics that you need to go ahead and use Photoshop to a basic level. And the tutorials that we do in future and the assignments that we do, you'll be using these skills again and again. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is go to File and New. And you will see when I went to File and New there, let me just cancel that, you'll see that some of these options have a dot dot dot. What that means is that a dialog box is going to come up. So if I click on New, a dialog box comes up and it offers us some options. We have clipboard on there. That will actually give us whatever we last copied. It will give us the size of document that is on our clipboard. We don't want that. We want to click on Preset. And we want to go to International Paper. And if you could select A4, and that will be automatically 210 by 297, 300 pixel range, and a white background. Basically, international paper and A4, and say OK. So here we go. What we want to do first is let's have a little look at the workspace. So over here on the left hand side we have the toolbox, and these are all the tools. You'll see that they're actually in different sections. We'll talk about that a bit later. We have at the top the tool options bar. So these are the tools, and you'll see I can click on different tools, and you'll see when I click on a different tool the options change. So each tool has its own options, and they are located up here. We also have some of these tools have little triangles in the bottom right hand corner. They're actually called deltas. What they mean is that that tool shares its space with other similar tools. So you can see I have the rectangular marquee tool, the ellipse tool. Here we have the lasso tool, magnetic lasso, polygonal lasso. So it means that there are other similar tools in the same space. So just click and hold down if you need to access those. Over here we have the palettes. We can arrange those palettes however we want. If you want to move them around completely, you can grab them by the bar at the top and the whole thing will move. We can put them back on the edge there and you'll see they should align themselves. There we go. See that blue bar appear and they align themselves again. They also, some of them have, well they all have, these little icons. So you may see them in icon form and they'll pop in and pop out like that. You can also move one palette to be grouped with another set of palettes. So if I wanted to move paths and put it with colour and swatches, I can grab it by the tab. You'll see a little blue box appears that shows where I'm going to drop it. There we go. Paths is now with colour and swatches. If we do things that we're not particularly happy with and we start kind of getting a bit messy with our palettes and we want to just get to how it was before, we can go to Window and Workspace, and we can reset essentials, or we can pick a different kind of workspace. There are workspaces set up for 3D, motion, painting, photography, typography, but I'm going to stick with essentials, so I'm going to reset essentials, and you see it's gone back to how we started. If there is a palette there that you can't see, that you want to open, all the palettes open in the window menu. So if you want to find a palette that you can't see, go to the window menu and you'll see them all listed here, and we can open them up. Okay, sometimes it will be that they're already there, they're just in icon format. So if I open the history palette, it will just show me that's where it is. It's popped out, now it's popped in again. That's how it works. So let's just have a look at using some basic tools. What I'd like you to do is grab the brush tool, and the brush tool lets us paint as if we're using a brush. We have different brushes up here, so just try clicking a simple brush first. If you click on this drop down menu, you can scroll up and down using the slider here, and if I grab the first brush in there, we should see that. Oh, I can't see because of the screen recording thing. We've got a size here which we can, whoa, move this out of the way. There we go. There we go. We've got a size here which we can slide up and down. We've got hardness. Okay, and what I'd like you to do is pop the hardness up to 100%, have the size at about 50. Okay, you should automatically have black as your fill colour, as your foreground colour. We'll talk about it in a second. And I would like you to just write your name. You don't need to write it accurately. I'm just going to put rich. Okay, so there we go. And we just click and drag to draw with the brush tool. You'll find that using a mouse can be a little bit tricky. There are things called graphics tablets, which are pens that you can use on a tablet, on a pad, that act in a very, very similar way to using a pencil. So if you do get into actually creating artwork on Photoshop, I would recommend that you purchase a graphics tablet. We do have some in college, and you can lend those out during class. So we've drawn something there. We could have experimented with the hardness. Let's have a look at what that does. I'm going to take the hardness right down now. So if you do that, we're going to take the stay down. We're going to take the size up to 100, and you will see, or close to 100, and you'll see that when we have taken the hardness down, we get this softer edge. Okay, that comes in useful for all sorts of things. Let's have a look at changing the colour. So the foreground and background colour are down here. The foreground colour is the top one that's in front, and to actually access that, we double click and we get the colour picker. This shows us all the colours in the rainbow along this spectrum, so you can drag or click anywhere in here. And then inside this box we have the colour in its purest form, the colour or hue in its purest form in this top right hand corner. Then we have that colour adding white, adding black, and adding greys. So we can get any kind of tint or shade of this colour by clicking in this box, and it will show you the colour here. So pick any colour you want and say OK, and if you can just draw some pretty kind of picture just to get used to it, I'm going to draw a flower. There we go. And let's change the colour. So I've got a blue flower, and I'll double click, and this time I'll get a green, maybe a bit of a dark green. And there we go, just to show me that you can use the colour picker and select different colours. So there we go. So we can change the hardness of the brush, the size of the brush, and we can change the foreground colour. We're going to look at the background colour shortly. Firstly, let's just zoom in. So let's look at different ways we can zoom in. The tool that we use to zoom in is called the zoom tool, and it lives over here. But before we look at that, the very simplest way you can zoom in is go to the view menu and zoom in. You'll see that these commands, many of these commands, have a shortcut. This little squiggly icon here is the command key, so that means hold down command and hit plus. So if I was to hit command and plus on my keyboard, which I'm going to do in a second, it would zoom in. So command and plus, I zoom in. So that's a very simple way of zooming in. If you want to zoom out, same thing, except with minus. So command and minus, there we go. We can also, if we've zoomed in and we want to fit the whole thing on the screen again, we can go to view and fit on screen. You'll see the shortcut for that is command and 0. So there we go. So zoom tool, what advantage is there to this? Well, if we click on the zoom tool, we can just click once and it will zoom in and it will go directly to wherever you click. You can also click and drag to the right to zoom in, click and drag to the left to zoom out. So let's just zoom in to parts of your name. I'm going to zoom into this little bit here. Okay, and let's just move around. I'll use the slider at the moment. And say we wanted to rub a little bit out. We could use the eraser tool. So we'll go to the eraser tool. It's got the same brush option as the brush tool, so I could go up here and I could change my size. So if I go for something around 50 pixels again, and I'll go for a hardness of 100%, I can just click and I can erase with the eraser tool. There we go. So, you know when I said we've got a background colour here, let's have a look at changing that now. So if I click on the background colour, I can go into the colour picker. Let's pick a different colour, go for a red. We'll say OK. If I try and rub out with that, can we see that when we've used the eraser tool, it simply draws with the background colour. Now this is only when we have one layer, one background layer. There are other situations where the eraser tool will rub out and it will give you transparency. But here we have a flat background image, and we're going to move on to layers in a future tutorial. So If we want to actually rub out and the background is white, we want to select white. If we want to undo something, like this last action that we want to undo, there are a few ways we can do it. We can go to Edit and Undo Eraser. Now you'll see that the shortcut for that is Command and Z, which is very useful. Let's have a look at what happens when we have undone once. So I'm going to undo eraser. There we go. Well, what if I want to undo where I erased out this little bit of the edge? What if I want to go back again? You'll see that where undo was becomes redo. So I can redo. But if I wanted to go back more than once, I have to go to step backwards. So edit, and I could undo once, or I could go straight to step backwards, and I can keep stepping backwards. So that's one way of undoing something. Another way of undoing is to use the history palette. Say we've done quite a few things, and every time we do a thing, whether that's rubbing out or drawing with a colour, it's an action. So if we want to undo an action, we can go to the history palette and it will show us all our actions here. Look, I'm just going to make this palette bigger. Can you see I'm making the palette bigger using this bottom right hand tab? And these are all my actions. I've been using the brush tool. I can click back through them, look, and it will keep undoing. At the moment you can't see it's off screen, but I'm undoing the flower. There we go, we've got to the name, my name. So I can undo like this. You'll see that the future stays greyed out. If I do want to get back to the future again, I can click on this. But if I go backwards and make a change, the future disappears. Okay, so be aware of that. Okay, then, so that is the history tool. Very useful when you've got a number of actions to undo. Okay, so what if we're making changes to something? What if I want to rub this little bit out? Oh, let's put this into practice. Let's undo eraser. Let's change my background color to white again. And by the way, at any time, let me just cancel that. Let me just show you this. If I want to go to default black and white at any time, I can click on this little default black and white option. I can also use this change round arrow. So if I want white as my foreground color and my black as my background color, I can swap them around quite easily there. Okay, so I've got white as my background color again. I'm going to rub this out. What if now I want to move over to the letter R? Well, I could go to view and fit on screen, or I could zoom out and zoom back in again. But there is an easier way. We can use the hand tool. If you imagine that the hand tool is like putting your hand down on a piece of paper and dragging it around, so I'm now clicking and dragging. That is the easiest way to navigate around an image when you're already zoomed in. Now, if I was doing a little bit of drawing, say I've got my brush tool and I'm doing something here, no matter what that might be, and then I want to move and do some more artwork, but I want to use the same tool, I don't have to swap to the hand tool. I can hold down the space bar. If I hold down the space bar, I temporarily get the hand tool. So there we go. I can hold down the space bar, I can drag around, and I can carry on, and it will, as soon as I let go, it will go back to the tool I was using. So that can be very useful, using the hand tool there. Okay, so now let's go to view and fit on screen, and let's have a look at what we've got. Now I undid the bottom of my flower, that's not a problem. What I'm going to ask you to do now is get a new colour, a different colour that you haven't used before, in your foreground colour. I will go with a yellow and say OK. And now let's have a look at a couple of the options up here. So we've got opacity. When something is opaque, it means that it is completely solid and you can't see through it. So an opacity of 100% means it's completely solid. We can change this. So if we put this to 50% opacity, have a go at putting that at 50% opacity. We'll get a bigger brush so we can really see what's going on. I'm going to go with like a 250 kind of size brush. There we go, I'll do. And have a scribble over some of the artwork that you've already created. You'll see that it is 50% transparent. So that's how we deal with transparency. Obviously, the lower the opacity, the more transparent it will be. We also have flow. At the moment, my flow is on 100%. If you imagine that the flow is like the rate that the ink comes out of your brush. So if I was to click, and let me just get a darker colour for this. If I was to click and drag, in fact, let me just take my opacity up to 100% because it's really obvious then. So if I was to click and drag, there we go, I'm getting a nice kind of solid line. Now if I take my flow down, take it down to 15, 16%, and click and drag. You can see it's almost like my brush is empty of ink. Okay, it gives a similar effect to transparent, okay, but it's actually working in a different way. So there we go, that's opacity, that's flow. We've got airbrush tools, we've got pressure sensitive tools. We're going to talk about those later because they're a bit more advanced. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to be able to save our document. So when we want to save our document, we go to File, and we can hit Save, or we can go to Save As. What I'd recommend is I would use Save As, because it will stop you from accidentally saving over work and losing a version that you may have wanted to keep. If you go to Save As, it will always bring up a dialog box, and you can give it a title here. I'll just call this my name, and then you can save it wherever you need to save it. Here we have formats. At the moment we're on JPEG. That's absolutely fine because we have a flat file. When we move on to layers, we're going to talk about some of these different file formats. Okay, and there we go. Save it. It's saved. We have, because we've got a JPEG up here, and again we'll talk about different file types later, but we have an option here to change the quality of it. At the moment, keep your quality on 10. But we can, if we want to, especially if we're doing kind of website design files and it's quite important to us to keep the file size down, we can change these settings. Okay, so at the moment we'll say OK. Now, when we've saved this file, you'll see, and it was there before now, but we've got a document that was 24.9 M. Okay, that's a shortcut for MB. MB stands for megabytes. What we need to do is have a little bit of understanding of the file sizes that we're working with as we move on through the course and we do more complex imagery with layers and bigger file sizes and bigger images. The file size is going to go up. Okay, so you just need to be aware that we are creating documents and you need to be able to actually save them. You should all have memory sticks. You also get 60 gigabytes. No, it isn't. What is it? No, it's 5 gigabytes. It's 5 gigabytes of storage on your F drive. Okay. Beyond that, we can use OneDrive, but just be aware of that. Okay, so we have covered how to use the brush tool, the fact that the tools share spaces. We've looked at the tool options bar and a couple of the options on the tools there. We've looked at some of the palettes, okay, or at least where they are and how to move them around. We've looked at the history palette. There is one more palette that I want to show you actually, and that is the Navigator palette. So if you go to Window and Navigator, that will open up the Navigator palette. We can just make that a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing here. So some of the things that we've been doing here when we've been zooming in, let's use the zoom tool and zoom in. You can do in one fell swoop using the Navigator palette. What is quite useful is that it shows you a little red outline box of what you're looking at, and you can see the thumbnail of the whole thing and drag around it. You've also got a little kind of zoom in, zoom out slider here. So we've got smaller mountains to zoom out, bigger mountains to zoom in. You can also type in here what percentage you want to view it at. So say I want to view it at 100%, I can type it in there and say OK. So the Navigator palette is really useful as well. Okay, so that is all we're going to cover for this session. It's just to give you a little bit of confidence and a little bit of idea of what the different parts are and how we change colours and where the tools are in a couple of those tools. Okay, so we can close that down. What you need to do is you don't need to print this one out. It is literally just to familiarise yourself. But you do need to now answer the quiz questions that are on your Moodle link. Okay, so thank you very much and goodbye.